Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and welcome to part 2 of the Label and Name Card Creator. In this exclusive training, we're going to show you how to create and add barcodes to your own labels, including product pictures and other types of pictures to any type of label. It's going to be an amazing and epic training. I can't wait. Let's get started. All right, thanks so much. This is part 2 of the Label and Name Card Creator. We've got a lot to cover. Last week we covered the basics of the ability to select the label design from an assortment of templates here. We also showed you how to select specific data files to put in your application and to create your labels, and also a little bit on the filter data, which we're going to follow up on today, and also the ability to design your own labels. We covered that last time, but this time we're going to go even more. We've got a lot to cover here. In fact, I'm going to show you how to create these barcodes, how to create product ID pictures, assuming that your actual data has links to those products. And we're also going to show you how to review and print, how to print those labels in any type of format. We really have a lot to cover in this episode. If you do like these trainings, make sure that you subscribe and click the notifications bell. I create these free for you with free downloads each and every week. Of course, if you'd like to get over 100 applications in one zip file, I also have that available for you in a 100 zip pack. In fact, right now, for a very short time, I do have a 20 workbook bonus. So actually, it's going to be 120 workbooks for limited time for just $37. So if you like these trainings and you want to help support it, I would appreciate you pick that up. Also, if you really love creating and your own applications and want to learn how to turn your passion into profits, we have an amazing Excel for Freelancers mentorship program that's now open. I'm going to take you week to week and show you how to create your own applications, whether you're defining your applications or designing them, how to develop them, and most importantly, how to deploy them so you can turn that passion into profits and reoccurring income into use. Just as I do with many of my applications for years, I'm now teaching you how to do that. So if that's something you might want to learn how to do, then I've got the ultimate program for you. I'll include the links down below if that's something you want. Moving on, let's go over this training. We've got a lot to cover. We covered last week. In this training, even if you can't follow the code, even if the code gets a little bit complex, don't worry about that, because I'm also going to show you how to create your own labels. Even if you just want to use this as an application in your own work, or maybe you want to redesign it and sell it to your customers, follow the training. Even if the code's a little bit difficult, keep following. I'm going to show you how to design your own labels. So the training will be for, part of it's going to be coding and show you exactly how I did this, but it can get a little bit complex, which is fine, and it may be above and beyond your current VBA skills. But I want you to also know what Excel is capable of, and also how to use this just as an application for your own customers or your own work or your own offices. So I'm going to show you how to design it. So it's really, really cool training. We've got a lot to cover, so don't worry about it if the VBA code's a bit much on this. I'm going to go over it slowly anyways. All right, so what have I done? I've added an added picture icon, and now this click, when you add a picture, you can actually select from a selection of pictures. And so I have some images here. In fact, I have one that's called border, and I've added it here. If you can see border, I've done that already, which is this border right here. And what that does is it takes this border as a picture, and this is a PNG, so it's got a transparent background. I've just placed it on this label. I've chosen a larger label this time. In the last training, we had a small address label. Now we've got a larger label, and this probably could be used for inventory or name cards or IDs, or really it's unlimited. This particular label has a measurement of 3 1/3 and the width of 3.8. So it's got a little bit smaller width as what I've designed, but I think this is going to fit the page really good. And you see there's 6 labels to a sheet on this one. So as we move through that, we can filter data. We're going to go and show you how this data is filtered. And our data, right, is actually stored here in the import data. So when you look at this, you'll see all of our data is here, and then of course when it gets filtered, you'll see it up here. So if we print the labels, let's go ahead and show you when we print the labels that the data is automatically filtered. So right now we have just ladies type. So when we click review and print, we're going to see that it's going to go through the motions and create those labels automatically. And then what we're going to do is, so here's our labels on printed labels. There's just 4 labels out of the data because only 4 fit our filter description. The first thing I want to show you is how we do that filter. When we look in the imported data, we see our original data is here. And that's what's been imported from a workbook. We went over that a little bit last time. And then what I did is I took all of this data and I run an advanced filter based on certain criteria. What criteria is that? Well, in this case, type would be ladies. So anything that came up would be under the type ladies shirts, and so only 4 results. So then our labels are created here based on this. So all of our label data is created from this list. This is our filtered list. So the results here, so all of this information, 1, 2, 3, 4, will then translate into printed labels here. We have the shirts, we have the barcodes, we have the ladies, and you'll see these are all actually text fields, so it's not as a picture, and that really helps us keep the link. And there's just 4 of them in this particular four labels. As you can see, I'll reduce the size. You can see the 4 labels. So then what I did is I want to give the user a preview. There may be hundreds of labels, but we're not going to, even if you print out hundreds of labels, this particular label creator, this preview here is just going to show a small sample. There's no reason, this is just a picture, right? All I did is I take a picture and I linked it. Take a look at this link, printed labels A1 to C3. So all that is a link to our printed labels, and it's limited. In other words, this one took on all the data, but if let's remove the filter so you can see just what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's our filter sheet. So if I remove this filter, and then we go back and take a look at design label and then go to review and print. It's going to take a little bit longer, but in this case, all of the labels are going to print, and you'll see that's a lot more, and it's going to take time, a little bit more time to create these labels, but it's a little bit of time, but it's not that long, and that's obviously much better than doing manually or creating these manually. That would take a ton of time. So in this case, all the labels are printing out. As you can see, and as soon as it's done, it's going to copy that. But still, again, let's take a look at this. Let's drop down. You see only, let's see how many in this case. We have a total of 10 labels. Just 10 labels are on the preview. We get the idea. The preview is just to get the idea, because when our labels are actually printed, we're not going to be printing from this picture. We're going to be actually printing from this printed label. This is the one we want to print. So when we run our print macro, it's going to go based on this, which contains all the data. The reason is we want to let the user know that everything's been created, and if there's an issue or there's something wrong, they can see it in this preview. So it's kind of just a brief preview. We don't want that preview to show all the labels. So keep that in mind. Okay, so it's based on the filter data. Now I showed you briefly in the imported data how we get this. I'm going to refilter the data. As you can see, here our results are all of them. This is an advanced criteria. There is no filter here. Remember, we had ladies here. So here's our criteria. Here is any criteria values that will be here, and here is our results here. This is an advanced filter. Remember, this is not our original data. If we slide over to the left, this is our original data. So it's going to take our original data and it's going to perform some type of a filter, so that when we go back in and we just simply add ladies once again to type, and we don't want an exact match, I want contains, so I'm just going to click contains, and that's going to put the asterisk both before and after. We went over that last time. Now we can skip the design because our design's not going to change, and we can go straight to review and print, which is kind of a nice feature. No need to redesign our list, and you see just 4. So back into our imported data, we now see that the 4 results. So basically what I want to happen is I want to take in our filter, which is the macro that we're going to go over right now, I want to take the headers. I want to take those headers and I want to copy them. I'm going to go 5 columns over. 5 columns, just because I want to make sure there's a space. So this is the last column. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the 5th column is where we're going to start our rows. Because your data is dynamic, when you import data, I don't know if you've got 100 columns or 3 columns. So what we're going to do is we're going to determine the last column. In this case, it's H, and we're going to move. Just give it 5 columns over. And then we're going to put a copy of the headers right here. Then I'm going to put whatever criteria they use. What is the criteria? The criteria is right here in select and filter. So we're going to take any information from here. We're going to take all this information here and paste it, transpose it actually into right here, into the rows here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm also going to take the headers, I'm going to repeat the headers and put them in row 3, and then I'm going to run our advanced filter, and that advanced filter, the results are going to be here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to determine the last row of the advanced filter. Okay, so that's exactly what we're going to do. And now let's go into the macro and see just how that's done in the macro portion. So into the VBA we go, into the module create label max. We have one that's called build label sheet. We're going to go over that in just a moment. That actually builds the sheet and creates the spacing for the labels. But the next macro is called filter data and create labels. This is a two-part macro. I'm going to go with both independently. And basically what the first part of this is we are going to simply run that filter. And that advanced filter is located right here. So filter data create labels. And the way we're going to do is we'll define, I need to know the first column and the last filter column and the total data columns. What is that? I need to know the columns. That's very important. What is the first column? We need to get all this data, right? The first column, the last column, which is here. So we need those in variables. And then I need to place them because I'm going to be placing them 5 columns over. So we need to get all that information. And that's very important. So we want to define that. We also want the label column, the label row, and the label number. I need to keep track of what label we're on. As we move through the labels, we need to know what row we're on, what column we're on, and what label number, because we may have 30 labels. We want to know how many labels and keep track of them. That's very important. The total label columns, I need to know all of the label columns, all the columns that we're creating, and all the label rows. I need to know those all. Also the first label row and the last label row and the data row. Those are all variables. I'll walk you through those. If I explain each one of them, it might be a little bit confusing. So I'm going to explain them as. So basically lots of variables that we keep track of what row or what column, pretty much. And of course, we also want to, the label template is a shape. We want to keep that template as a shape, right? And we also wanted a temporary label shape. What is that? Let me just go over both of those with you because those are really important. We have our label creator here. And if we look into this design your label, this is a group that's created. All of these shapes are created into a group. So when we move to the next tab, they're all grouped together and they created a label template. So I'm creating a label template. Basically, it's all the shapes combined, but not the background, not this background. That stays where it is. That does not get included, but everything else does. Okay, so keep that in mind. And then, so what that is, and then what I want to do is I want to take this group of shapes. So into the label, basically what we want to do is there's our links. So there's internal links. So if we see this, the purchase quantity is 12, but this internal link of the quantity, right, the data, remember the label can have the link of what was on our design sheet, but our link here for the data, that is located on imported data R4, just so we get an idea. R4, well, if we look in the imported data and we look at R4, we find it here. So remember, our data, the values are going to be all linked to this sheet, linked to the results here. So each one, so the next one, for example, the purchase quantity in this would be R5, the next row over. This one would be R6, and then this one would be R7. So each one is linked to the individual data. So that's what we're trying to create. And so basically, we're going to take our temporary group here. We're going to use it. We're going to paste it into the right place. We're going to update all the links within it. We're going to show any picture. Then what we're going to do is once we're done, we're going to delete that temporary group. It's, you know, we're going to delete the group. We don't need a group. The group is just used to copy over. And that's it. I mean, it sounds simple, but it's, you know, it's going to take a little time because there's things we have to make sure of. So I'm going to show you that way. So, but the first thing we want to do is we want to take our filters, whatever filter the user might have. Let's take our filters in the filter data here and bring them over here. So take our filters and bring them over so we can filter any data. That's important because you may not want to create labels for all of your data. So let's continue in the macro here under a new workbook open. This is from our imported data, so we don't need that. Okay, so let's continue with our macro here. So the first thing we want to do is I want to remove any shapes in sheet 3. Why do we want to do that? Well, sheet 3 is our labels, our printed labels. So if we're creating new labels, we need to make sure that every single shape on this sheet is deleted. That's the first thing we want to do because we're going to create brand new labels. We certainly don't want duplicate labels or anything like that. So we've made a change. So the first thing we want to do is delete all the shapes on this sheet. That's only sheet 3. So we're going to do just that with this part of the macro. for each label shape, remember we've defined this right here as a shape, so it already knows it's a shape right under here. Label shape right here as a shape. Label shape, we defined it as a shape. So for each label shape in sheet 3, only sheet 3, that's our label shapes, what do we want to do? Just delete it. So it's going to loop through all of them and delete every shape. That's important. And then we're going to clear it out. We're going to set the label shape to nothing. We're going to use it later. All right. We also want to remove any label preview if existing. If there is a label preview, we want to delete that on sheet 1. Why is that? That is this. What is the label preview? Let me show you what that is. That is this right here. If we're creating, let's move this sheet. If we're creating a brand new, let's have this run again. This shape, this is the preview. This is called label preview, and it's on sheet 1. This is sheet 1, and this is our label preview. I want to remove that because we're going to be adding a new preview. This is sheet 1, label creator. We need to remove this preview here. I want to get rid of that because we're going to create a brand new one. So we also want to do that in the code. All right, and in case it doesn't exist, if it would create an error if it doesn't exist, that's why I've wrapped this in on error, resume next, and on error, go to 0. We want to make sure that exists. With sheet 1, that's going to be our focus. We want the total data columns to J23. We want to get those variables, and we want to bring them into our VBA code through variables. And you can see here under J, let's see, right under here actually, J23, our total rows here, and our total columns. So we need that information. That's very important based on our data. So you need to pull that into variables in the VBA code. So also the first filter column equals total data columns plus 5. Remember I just explained to you, we want to go 5 columns over for our advanced filter criteria and results. So if our total data columns are right here, here's our total data columns, including the picture link, our first results column is 5 columns over. Let me reduce that so you can see. I'll just bring these columns, reduce these columns a little bit so you can see them. All right, reduce those columns a little bit. So what we want to do is we want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and set that first column right here. And of course, our last column is going to be basically this column plus the total columns. In this case, it would be the last one, T. So we also want to set that because that's where we're going to put both of our criteria and our advanced filter. So our first filter column is the total data columns plus 5. Our last filter column, again, is the first filter column plus the data columns. First filter column, last filter column. We need those. That's very important. Let's just look at it again because it can get a little bit. So our first filter column's here. Our last filter column is right here. So we need to put those into variables. In this case, what are they? Equals column. It'll be depending upon your 13, right? And then our last is column, it would be 20. Okay, so 13 and 20 into variables, and those are inside the data. So we have those. Next up, what I want to do is I want to copy over the header criteria. This sheet is cleared out every time there's new data, so we want to make sure, what is that? I want to take our headers here, all the columns here, and I want to copy them over. I want to copy them over in 2 places. I want to copy them, paste them here and here. In the first column, row 1, in the first column, row 3. You're going to copy those over. That's for our criteria and our results. So we could do that with just this, with these 2 lines of code. Range, right, because we're more than one cell. Sheet 4, that's our data. Cells, row 1, the first column of our data. And then what's the last column? The last filter column. So all these values equal 1, 1, which is the first column of the original data and the first row of the original data, and also plus the total data columns plus 1. That's going to copy over the headers, and then this line is also going to copy over for the results. And of course, that the only difference in is this is in row 3. Remember, rows 1 and 3 is where we're going to bring that over. That brings both of those headers into our criteria and our results for our advanced filter. What is the next thing? The last header row. I need to know the last header rows. Application worksheet function count A, D27 plus 26. That's going to get us our last header row. Why is that important? Because we're going to have to loop through the header rows. So when we look back into our worksheet here under label creator and we look under, you see D27, I need to know all the headers. D, I want to count all, because we're going to have to loop through these. So I need to know the first, right, to the last. What is the last? In this case, it's 34. So I need to know that because we're going to be looping from 27 all the way to 34. We need to loop through all the data. We need to know that because I need to know the criteria and bring those in. But I need to know where to start and where to end so we can copy and paste those criteria in. But I need to know the start. I know the starting row is 27, but I don't know the last row. So we need to get the last row. We can use count A, and what that does is it's going to count the text just like a formula inside Excel. It's going to say we can do the same thing with application worksheet function count A, and it's going to count all the text, and then we'll know the number. So we can do that again with the last header rows application worksheet function count A, the range. This is with sheet 1, of course we defined it here, D27 through D77 plus 26. Why are we adding 26? Because our row, I want to count all of them. I want the last row. If it just counted them and there was 5, it would be row 5, but it would actually end on row 31. So we need to make sure we add 26. That's going to get us the last header row. We know it starts at 27. We just don't know where it ends. This will determine where it ends. If the last header row is less than 27, then exit sub. That would mean no headers. Headers are incredibly important for advanced filters, so without that we can't really do much. So we'd exit the sub if there's nothing there. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take G27 through G in the last header row and copy that. Again, we're going to take G, this is column G, all the way to the last header row, in this case 34. We're going to copy it just like this. And then what I'm going to do inside VBA, I'm going to go to the import data and I'm going to paste it. But I'm not going to paste it, I'm going to transpose it right here. And I'm not going to include the formats, but I'm going to use transpose and just the transpose the values. And that's all we're going to do, but we're going to do it in VBA. So let's show you how we do that. So we're going to copy it here, and then sheet 4, our labels, our labeled data, cells, the second row, remember the first row is our headers, the third row is our headers. So the second row, the first filter column, paste special, paste values. True is for transpose. So that's going to copy over all the filters, but only the values, not the format. And true, if this was false, it would copy downwards. But we're going to copy across. Just all we need to do is add a true in that third place right there. All right, now we have the criteria. So now what do we have in as far as our code's concerned? We have the first row, we have the criteria now, we've copied that over, and we have this. We just don't have the data yet. Now what we're going to do is we're going to run an advanced filter, get this data. So to do that, I need to know the last row here, run an advanced filter, include the header rows here, using these results, all these results, and then pasting the results here. So we're going to do that inside the code with the advanced filter, but we just need to know the last row. So the last data row is .range H22. We've already defined the last row, so we don't need to know it. The last row is automatically here into H22. That is our last row of data. We've defined it. This allows you as a user to also put in what you want. If you have a specific last row, you can do that here. H22 is our last row. So we put that into a variable. Now we know. Now we're ready to run our advanced filter. So sheet 4, the range, starting with the first column, the first row, all the way to the last data row, plus the total data columns, plus one, we're going to run an advanced filter. And I want to copy all that data. And where do I want to copy it? I want to copy it to the next range. But first I want to get the criteria. What is the criteria? Again, it's our first filter column, row 1, all the way to our last filter column, row 2. Row 2 is where our criteria is located. Row 1 is where our header is located. We want to make sure to include those headers in our criteria. And we're going to copy it to range, and we're going to copy it to row 3, same area. So we're going to copy it to row 3, the first filter column again, to row 3, the last filter column. Unique values equals true. We can change this to, that way we have unique records. You can also change that to false. What that's going to do is that's going to get us our data. And if there's a filter, it's going to get us just a limited amount of data. Now that's it. Now we are ready to build the label. So this macro carried us all the way to our data right here. Label template, imported data. Now we've got our 4. Now all we need to do is determine the last row of data, which in this case is 7, start out at 4, loop through all of the data and create our labels. So for each label, what do we want to do? Well, what I want to do is I want to take a copy of this in the design label stage. I want to copy this again, copy all, it's going to go through the macro again, copy all of the shapes here, paste them into the printed label as a group, as a temporary group. Then I'm going to loop through all of the imported data between 4 and 7, loop through that, and adding these values into the individual shapes of that group. And if it's a picture, I want to pull up the picture and place it. I want to base it on this particular size. I want to base it on this size, on this dimension. How far is this down? How far is this to the right? And what is the size? So we're going to take that sample picture. We're going to basically copy over all of the different styles, and we're going to place it right the same place. And that way on this label page, everything gets placed accordingly in the right spot. Not everything is moved down. So it's all based on the template, all based on the template that you created. And that way it's very easy. For example, if we just go into label template and we go into the design label phase, if we design our label and we decide we want the barcode on this side, we move the barcode over here, we move the shirt here, and then we're redesigned. Now we can go back into the review and print, and it's going to change that accordingly. So when we look at it, we're going to see now the barcode's on the left and the shirt's on the right. So it's going to, any change you make to that template, it's going to automatically make those changes on the actual labels, which is really cool and really easy. All right, so now moving on our code. Now we have the data. Now we're ready to build the labels. So the first thing that what I want to do is I want to set the label template to sheet 1 template group. This is a group of shapes that you've created on your design that includes all those. Remember, not that white background, but everything that's in there, we're going to create. It's already created here. How do I create this template group? If we look in here under label design macros, this groups, I think I went over this with you last time, group template shapes. This macro here groups all the shapes that you've created, and it gives it a name, template group. So that all those design shapes, the shirt, the barcode, the font, everything gets grouped automatically in this macro here, and it creates a name called template group. That's the one we're focused on. That's the one I want to copy over. So now we're going to set the label. And remember, this has been defined as a shape up here, right here, template label shape as a shape. So keep that in mind. Temporary label shapes is the one we're going to use on the label, right? Label template is the original one on sheet 1. Remember, we have our original one that we've created, and then also I want a temporary one that we're going to copy over, and that temporary one is going to be deleted on our label shapes, just so we can clear that up. I know it's a little bit hard. All right, a little bit confusing. The label template is original here. So the label template, we're going to set that as. Now we want to make sure that it exists. Okay, so label template visible, we don't need this. We don't need to make it visible. All right, on error. So if the label template is nothing, then what we want to do is run that macro, the one that I just showed you, group template shapes. So if for some reason it's not showing up, we want to group the shapes. So I just have to make sure that exists. Otherwise, if that group doesn't exist, we can't create labels from it. So again, we're going to run on error resume next. We're going to set the label template. We're going to make it, this is our second try, right? Here was our first try, but if there's an error, this would be nothing, right? So we want to give it one more try. We're going to group it. And now we're going to set if there's still an error, if the label template is nothing still, we need to exit out of the step. We can't create labels. Perhaps maybe there was no design, or maybe the data changed, or some issue. Maybe they skipped a step. We want to make sure that that group, sheet 1, shapes template group, that must exist, right? It has to exist. All right, so moving on. Now we know that it exists. Now we can set the first data row as 3. Actually, I don't need that first data. We've already defined it as 4, so we don't need that. Why do we not need that? Because we have the data label row set as 4. This sets our first data row. Why is that? Well, because our first row of data is in 4, so that's it. We don't need that. Let's continue on with our code right here. The last data row, I need to know the last data row, is sheet 4, cells 999, the first filter column. I need to get the last row of data in that first filter column. What is that? This is our first filter column. In this case, it's column N. So we're going to go all the way to 99 and get the last one with a value. In this case, it's 7. But I need to know. I know it starts at 4, but I don't know where it ends. So that one line of code will get us number 7. So we now know the starting row is 4. We can go all the way to 7. So that's important. We got to loop through that. So we have our last data row. We know our first row is a 4. Now we're ready. So E141 value equals the last data row minus 3, the number of labels to print. E47, what is that? Let me just take, I want to show you what that is. That is over here into E141, I want to put the labels to print in the summary, and I also want to know the required sheets. So we got to put that here under labels to print so we know how many labels to print. Gives the user a nice idea. All right, so we put that in G141. What is that? That is, how do we know how many labels? What if we have 100 labels that we need to print, and we have, let's say we have one sheet that holds 30 labels. If we have one sheet that holds 30 labels, how do we know how many labels that it holds? Because that's located right here. Labels per sheet, 6. So in this case, right, in this case we have 4 labels to print, and the labels per sheet is 6. So what I want to do is do a division, 4 divided by 6, and round it up. That means one sheet. That means 4 divided by 6 would be less than 1. Therefore, we're going to round up one sheet. If we have more labels to print, if we remove that filter, it's going to round up. So it's always going to be increased. And we can do that through this particular formula. Application worksheet function round up. I want to round up because I want to know the total number of sheets. So if we use a half a sheet, we need to know that. The last data row minus 3. This gives us the total number of rows that we are going to, how much data, how many labels that we're going to make, how many labels, divided by E9. What is E9? That is the total number of labels per sheet. So in this case, 4, right, because we have 4 labels to print, divided by 6 with less than 1, but we're rounding up with no decimals. We're rounding up, round up. So this is going to give us a result of 1. I want to know. So that way, let's say you going in a printer, you need to know how many label sheets to put in. This will automatically tell you. So it's a very, very handy feature. We automatically, it's going to go through the macro again and review and print. So it's automatically going to tell you exactly how many sheets you need right here. So then we're going to put the results of that into G141. It tells you how many sheets that you'll need to load into the printer. So we have that here. And that is done with this. So G141 will take that value. Next up, I need the total label columns. I want to know how many columns. That's located in E11. And I also need to know how many rows, right? Each label has a certain number of columns and certain number of rows. That's located here. So under label design, E11 number of columns, G11 number of rows. So for example, this label contains 2 columns and 3 rows to get a total of 6 labels. That's important. We need to know that information. So the label, this will give us the label columns. The total label rows, again, is the last. So how many rows do we need? So how many total rows? All right, so in this case, we have 4 labels to print. If we have 4 labels to print, and there's 2 labels per column, how many rows do we need? Well, we need 2 rows, right? 2 rows. We're printing 4 total. So if we have 2 labels per column, we need 4 rows. So this formula will do just that. Application round up. The last data row, the total number of the total. Remember, this is 7 minus 3 because our last data row is 7. 4 labels to print. Total columns, in this case, it's 2, right? 2 columns. So we're going to round up, no decimals. So in this case, with total label rows is 2, right? 4 divided by 2 is 2. So we know we need to go 2 columns and 2 rows. That's going to get us our label. So we need to know that. That's very important. We don't need this here. Okay, so next up, what do we have? The last label column. What is the last label column? Is the total label columns plus the total label column plus 1. I know, why is that? Why does that sound strange? Total label columns, I thought it was 2. Well, actually, there's a spacer. Let's take a look at that. So when we're actually building our labels, we're actually skipping because there's a spacer. So look at this. A, B, and C. There's actually 3, even though our column, because sometimes our spacer is going to be large, sometimes it's small, depending upon the label. So I actually need to build out 2 different columns. So for example, a label that contains 2 columns is actually 4 columns. So I need to double it minus 1. Double it minus 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, minus 1. So we're going to go from 1 to 3. 1 to 3. And the same thing for rows, because rows could have a space too. For example, 1, so with 2 rows, we're actually going to go, again, 3. So because we need that spacer, some labels need a space between them, some don't. So we need to skip rows and we need to skip columns so we can add in a spacer. Where does that spacer come? It comes from right here. Column spacing, 1. That means it's going to be slightly. Row spacing, 0. So that means I don't want any space between rows. If I were to change this and change these, the spacing would be larger in the spacing would be here larger, or the spacing, in this case, it would be 2, would be larger here. But for this particular label, there's no spacing on the rows and there's only a small spacing on the column. So that, keep in mind, that's why we need to not only, if our label has 2 columns, I actually need to make it 4 minus 1, right? Double it, minus 1. So we do that just in this line of code. So the last label column goes to the total label columns. In this case, it's 2, plus 2 minus 1. 2 minus 1 is 1. So 2 plus 1 is 3. Same thing for the label rows. We do that. So basically, because I want to know the total label columns because I have to compensate for those spacer columns, both in the columns and the labels. So that's important. The last label row, again, is the total label rows plus the same thing minus 1. No difference. So that will allow us to skip those. The last design row. What is the last? It's the last header row plus 56. What is this? Well, I need to know also the last design row. When we go into the label creator, we go into the design tab, you'll see I need to know the last. Again, this starts at, let's pull up the design here, 83, and it goes to, in this case, 90. So we need to know the last design row. So the last design row is the last header row plus 56. Why 56? Because 56 is the difference, right? We have our last header rows here. If our last is header row, we've already defined it here, 34, we've defined it. But now we need to get the last design label. So how do we go from 34 to 90? 34 to 90, we just add 56. So I want to go through these two. I know it starts at 83, but what's the last row? All I need to do is add 56 because these are the same. So these are the same. 34, remember, it's always going to be the same, but this one's used for filtering and this one's used for designing. So if we know the last row here for our filtering is 34, we want to get the last row for our design. All we need to do is add 56 to get us to 90. So that's why we do that there. All right, so now we're ready. Now we're going to activate sheet 3. That's going to activate our labels. We're going to set our label row and our column row 1, and our label number is 1, right? We're going to loop through all the labels. We're going to be creating 4 different labels, but we're going to increment this up by 1. I want to keep track of all the labels that were created. That's important. And so we want to start our label and our column off. Then what I want to do is I want to copy the template. Remember, we've already defined the template up here, right here. Set the label template. That's the original design template. I'm going to take it and I'm going to copy it. Then I'm going to activate sheet 3. Then I'm going to paste it in. First, I'm going to select A1. I'm going to paste in. That's a temporary shape that we're going to use to create all other labels. So the destination is going to be A1. That's our first one. That's important because we need to know that. Then what I want to do is I want to define that differently. I want to call that the temporary label shape because we're going to delete that, right? Once we create all of our labels, we can delete that template. So template or temporary label shape, whatever you want. Temporary label shape is this workbook shapes the printed labels shapes template group. This is the sheet. So we're gonna take that group that we just copied over. We're gonna rename it. I want to rename it, redefine it. Now it's called temporary label shape. We're gonna use this to create all other labels. But first, we're going to set up our first loop. And to do that, we need to set the label data row. We know our first row of data is 4. Remember, our first row of data right here is always going to be cleared it out because let's go ahead and recreate it. All we need to do is click on review. It's going to reprint those out. It's going to launch the data. All right, so now our imported data again is row 4 here. And so we got to set the initial list 4. I'm going to go to the last row. All right, so we know why it's 4. We know why the data row is 4. Now we can set 2 loops. I need one for the rows and one for the columns. The first loop is through the rows. Second loop is through the columns. What does that mean? Well, that means here, first loop, I want to go through 1 loop, 2 loop, but then inside that loop, go from 1 column to 2 columns. So basically, we're going to start out here in A1. We're going to move to C1. Then we're going to move to A3, and then we're going to go to C3. All those 4 are going to be done in that order. So those are 2 loops that we need to do. So for the label row equals 1 to the last label row. Step 2. Why are we stepping 2? Because remember, we have that spacer row. We need to go from A to C. So we need to step 2. We need to go from 1 to 3. So also in the rows, we're stepping 2 because the middle row or the middle column is just used for spacing only. All right, next up. So we're going to do the same thing for the label column. Step 2, we're going to skip that spacing. First thing I want to do is I want to set the label cell. That's the cell that we're currently on, the cell that we're working with, where we want that label pasted. That's the label cell. So it's going to be this worksheet, sheets, printed labels. We're going to specify the sheet very clearly. And then the label row and the label column. That's going to set the cell. So the first thing I want to do is take that template, that temporary shape that we've just copied in there. I want to copy that right into the cell, into that specific cell. Then I'm going to select the cell to place the shape in. Just in case there's an error, sometimes there's an error, it's going to go, why would there be an error after the pasting? Why? Because sometimes it goes so fast that it causes an error. If you find a better way, let me know. The only way I could get around this error is to basically slow it down. In other words, there was a really interesting bug that I worked a lot with, and basically every once in a while it would just bug on this line and say you cannot paste. But I kind of figured out it was due to speed. So as soon as I realized I could slow it down a little bit and it wouldn't cause it. So we're going to go to error handle. What does that do? It's going to go all the way down to the bottom here, error handler, and it's going to create a little bit of a wait on just that one. Then it's going to copy the shape. Then it's going to wait again, and then it's going to paste the destination. Then it's going to resume back. That kind of worked out well. So if you'll notice, sometimes on somebody you'll see it slow down for a second and then speed up. That's what this error handler does. Maybe there's a better way. If there is, let me know. If you see something, if you see a better way to handle it, let me know. I would love to learn, of course, always learning. Okay, but that usually, every once in a while, we will do that, but we've gotten around that error. So now, once we've pasted in this shape, we need to work with it. I need to position it, and I need to set the links. So with the temporary label shape, with that label shape, what I want to do is I want to give it a specific name, and I want to place it. Again, so we've pasted this shape in here in this cell, not including the picture. But now what I want to do is I want to position it exactly where I want it, and I want to give it a name. Notice this has label 1. Notice this has label 2. So I want to give it an independent and unique name. So to do that, I'll do that in the following steps. So first we position it, the left and the top of whatever cell. The visible, I want to make it visible, and then I want to give it a name, label, and the label number. Remember, we're incrementing the label numbers per every single label. So that assigns it a specific and unique name for that label. All right, next up, so now we've pasted the label, but at this point in our code, all the data doesn't exist yet. We need to link the data. The labels are fine. The labels can stay the way, but the actual data needs to be linked with the individual row in the data. It needs to be linked here. Each column needs to be linked if it's existing. So what do I need to do? So for each label, what I need to do is I need to go through each one of these, starting at 83 and going to 90 in this case. If there's a check mark, I want to link the data. If there's a check mark, we're going to determine if there's a check mark, and I want to link the data, whatever shape's been associated. I want to link that data with the individual columns here. So if they're checked, I need to link the shape with the column. We do that in the code following this. So let's continue on. The label data column equals the first column. The label data column equals first column. Why is that? Because we need to loop through those columns of the data. So our label data column is going to loop through this column, then this, but we need to start it out at the first column and loop through all of these. So we need to keep track of what column we're on. All right, so for the design row equals 83 to the design row, I need to create another loop. Why are we creating another loop? Because I need to start it out and I need to look to see if it's got those check boxes. Starting at 83, going to the last one and checking. Is it checked? If so, if it's checked, that means we need to link, that means that data, I need to link this with the actual data. So we're going to check to run to see if there's a check mark there. And we can do that with the following code. If G in the design row equals that U with the 2 dots, then show data, or maybe it's a picture, we don't know. We're going to check for both. If it's a picture, we need to show the picture. If it's data, we show the data. So we can do that with an if-then statement or else, if-then-else statement. So check if it's a picture, do this code. else, if it's not a picture, run this code. So I'm going to walk you through each one of those. Assuming it is a picture, let's go. How do we test for it's a picture? Well, I'm testing it if the data maybe equals more than one of these backslashes. Where is the data? Sheet 4. Remember, that's our data. Label data row, label data column. So what is that? We're looking in the imported data. We're looking at this value right here. Does it contain more than one backslash? If it does, it possibly a picture. It could be a file, so we do need to double check that. But if it's a picture, right, if it contains these backslashes, it could be a picture. So that's what I'm checking for using the inString command. InString, this particular file, if it equals a backslash, if it's greater than 1, if they're counting more than 1, then a file found. It's possibly a picture. So let's see if it's a picture. We can run this test. Set the item picture equal to sheet 1 item picture in design row. Check if the correct file name. We're going to check to make sure it's a correct file name. Then if it exists, then let's assume the picture exists. Then if it's nothing, if it's not nothing, those two negatives cancel each other out, and that means it does exist. A picture does exist there, or at least a file, hopefully a picture. Then otherwise, we can now assume that it's a picture, and with sheet 3, we can insert it based on that entire file name. That entire file name is located right here in sheet 4, cells label data row. Then with the shape range, what I want to do is I want to assign a specific name to that picture. A very specific and unique name. Item label picture, that's the first part. The design row, I want to know what row, and I want to know what the label number is. So that way, when we have a picture, we have a very specific and unique name for that picture. For example, this shirt is item label picture 91. Where does the 90 come? That comes from the design row. 1 is the picture. Again, 90 because it's based on the row, and 1. That way you can have more than one picture. That way, where does that 90 come from? Just so you know, in the label creator, under the design section, here, it's going to pull it up from this row here. This is the row. That way we have a unique name for every picture. So we can have multiple pictures because each one has a unique name. 90 comes from here. All right, so let's review that again, continuing on with our code. So now we understand what a unique name for the picture. Let's slide this over here. For the picture based on the design row and the label number. That gives us a unique row. Now that we've assigned it as a unique name, now what do we need to do? Now I need to size and position it. This picture, when installed, is probably very large. It's going to be like this and like this. So what I need to do is I need to do a few things. I need to size it accordingly to the sample, and I need to position it. So I need to do size it and position it according to this. So what are we going to size and position it to? Well, pretty much I need to size it and position it based on the design. I'm going to size it exactly according to this picture here, item picture 90. I want to size it exactly to item picture, and I want to position it based on this position here. So we can do that in the next part of the code. So if we look here under sheet with the item label, now we're focused on just this picture that we already named unique. We're going to set the height to the item picture height. What is the item picture? Well, that's been designed up here. Set the item pic equal to sheet 1 in the design row. We know it's a picture now, so we're setting the picture to that original picture on sheet 1. Setting it there. Because we've given it that name, item picture in the design row, setting that. So once we set that, we can now work with it. So we're going to set the height of our new picture to that exact height. We're going to set our new width to our new picture based on that exact width. And also the left, I want to set the position is going to equal the label row to left, set the initial position, and on the left, so this sets it to the only based on the cell so far. Then I'm going to move it over to the right and move it down according to what? According to the label shape. Remember our back label shape, left and top. What is that? Let me walk you through. So we have our label shape here. Look, this is our back label shape. So if I know this picture is a little bit down from this and a little bit straight, so it's based on this. So if this would be 0, 0, right? It would be exactly the same at top and left, but it's not. It's actually over here. So we're going to base it on this shape right here. Wherever this shape is located, that is in the difference between this top and this left. That's exactly how we're going to place it. We're going to use that label background to position this shirt exactly to the top, to the left of wherever this is. So we can use that label background, the left position of that, and just move it over. So we can do that with this code. So the increment left is based on the item picture left minus, right? Because the item picture left minus the back shape left, wherever this back shape is, and do the same thing from the top. So basically we're using the difference of it, we're using the difference of that to move it over to the right or move it down. And that positions it exactly where. Now we're ready to display the picture using this. We can display it. Now the picture is set at the right height and the right size. That's it. That's all we have to do if it's a picture. What if it's not a picture? If it's not a picture, it's data. What I need to do then is I need to link it, and I need to do two things. I need to name it and link it. So let's go through our sample and see what that is. In our printed labels, I need to take this, let's say this is the value, label 1, data 88. Again, this one would be label 2, data 85. So I need to name it and I need to link it. This one is linked to import 05. So I need to link it to the original data located in our results right here. We can do that with the following lines of code. Let's slide this over a little bit. Sheet 3, shapes, data in the design row. That's the original shape that we're focused on. Drawing object, I want to give it a formula and I want to link it to the imported data sheet based on whatever row we're focused on and whatever column. Remember, looping through rows and columns. And I want to base it on the address. So I want to assign it the address. That's going to automatically link that to the original data. Next up, I want to give it a name. So we can give that same shape, but this time we're giving it a name, not assigning a formula. The label number, and the data in the designer. This gives it a very unique name so we know exactly where it points to. All right, next up we want to do is here's one of the issues that we face, why we have to use pick up and apply on these cases. So if, let me show you an example of how that would work. Let's go into the design. Let's say this, and we'll go over the barcodes in just a second. So let's say, actually let's do that now. We can do both. This barcode, if we take a look at that, let's drop that down. All we did is this is simply a product showing the data, and this is all data. All we're doing is changing the font. I've got code 128. Just simply changing the font. So let's say we use Cambria and we could just, you see it's just a font. So all I do is change the font to the barcode fonts, code 128, code 128, and hit enter. But let's say it's located to E83, but what happens if I link it again? Paste this equals E83. I'm going to lose that font. You see that? It lost. As soon as we relink it, we lose the font. We also lose formats too. We lose a lot. So if I, for example, if I give it a red color and I give it a black border, black color, but if I link it again, it's going to, again, let's E83 equals E83. We lose a lot of the formatting. I've lost the red color. I've kept the background, but I've lost the font and I've lost the color of that. So what I want to do is I want to take the original shape and I want to pick it back up. I want to pick it up. The important thing is as soon as you link, you're going to lose some of the formatting. So all we need to do is pick up the original one and paste it over. We can do that with just 2 lines of code. Take the original sheet 1 shapes data in the design row. Take the original, pick it up means copy the formats basically, and then apply that same formats, apply to our new shape. So that keeps our formatting. That's how we can keep all of that formatting, keep any colors, any type of font. It's going to keep it by reapplying it, basically reapplying, because after we link it, we lose it. So keep that in mind. That's why we have to pick it up again and apply it again. So that is going to re-enter our format so that we can have proper formats. And so now you're going to see without the label, without the barcode. But if as soon as we apply that barcode again into the design label, let me just show you that again. Take it. All we need to do is add a new font. We can create any types of barcode. We can even make it a lot bigger, create it hot bigger, and then add the barcode, which is code 1 of 128 right here. And that creates a nice barcode. We can make it a little bit bigger. And so it's going to maintain those barcode fonts. Now we go into review and print. It's going to keep those because it's used to pick up and then apply, so that all of those fonts are going to be maintained. All right, so I'm glad I got to show you why that is. Then what I want to do is I want to remove the template picture that's copied over the item picture in the design. I want to remove the template picture that's been copied over. We don't need that anymore. All right. Next up, the label data column equals, I want to increment the data column from 1 to 1. Why do we want to do that? Because I need to move through all the data columns. So we need to increment that. In our data sheet here, I need to go from column to column, starting this column, column, column. So we need to increment it by 1 as we move through each row of the data. Next up, we're going to go through the next design row as we go from row 83. We're going to set that and then set the template group, reset the template group to the original shape. We made changes to the template label shape, so we need to reset that back to the original shape. Label number, we need to increment the label numbers 1. We also need to increment the data row, label data row. Why do we do that? Because I need to go to the next data, right? We started out at 4, we need to go to 5, then 6, and 7. So we need to go through all of our data, so we need to increment that by 1 as well. Next up, if the data row is greater than the last data row and exit, that means we've completed throughout all of our data. Once it's greater, we can then exit out, but if it's not, we can continue to the next label column. Again, we're going to run another row check if the data row is greater than exit 4. So as soon as the last one's row, so as soon as we get to 8, we're going to exit out. We want to make sure we've covered all of our data, so we need to exit out. If not, we can go to the next label row. So it's going to remember we're looping through both the columns and the rows. All right, so what's next up in our macro? Next up, I want to remember we copied over a template group, a temporary group over into sheet 3 so that we can then copy that. We're done with the template group. We can delete it in case it doesn't exist. I've wrapped it in on air, resume next. Also, if the label row is greater than 10, then label row equals 10. Why is that? What I want to do now is I want to take all of our labels, all of our printed labels, in this case it's just 4, and I want to create a link, a picture link. I want to create a picture, and then I want to link it back to here so that I can create this review, but I want to limit it to 10 rows. I don't want to create more than 10 because it's just a small picture. I don't want to create all the labels, so I need to set the limit to the row. So if the last label row is greater than 10, because in this case I only want to set a limit of 10. We don't want to create more than that. So we can do that with this. If the label row is greater than 10, set the maximum height for a sample picture. Next up, I want to set the label range. So this is going to give us our picture. Is going to equal to range sheet 3 starting at the first column in the first row of our labels, going all the way through the last label column. It's going to set our range. Then we're just going to clear out any formatting any application cut copy mode. I'm going to have a little bit of weight to slow it down in case there's some issues, some speed issues. Then what I want to do is I want to take this range, I want to copy a picture based on that specific range. That's going to create a picture based on just that range. Then I'm going to wait again just in case there's some issues. It's a little bit, if speed is an issue, then I'm going to paste in D143. Why D143? Why D143? Well, right here I want to paste it right here in D143. This is going to give us basically the idea of where I want to put it, and then I'll move it over to the right just a little bit. So D143 is a good cell to place it in. So next up, selection formula, printed labels, and label address range. I want to give it a formula. This brand new picture, I want to give it a specific formula. What is the formula? It's going to be based on this. Let's take a look at it. This formula equals printed labels A1 through C3. That's going to give us a very specific look, a preview of whatever's on the printed labels in those same cells. So when we link it, it links to whatever is there. All right, so next up in our code, now that we've linked it and given it a specific formula, we can give it a specific name too. With that selection, I want to give it a name. Why do I want to give it a name? Because I want to make sure I can delete it later on when we have a new one. So when we give it a name, we know what name to delete. All right, moving on. Now in our code, we're going to clear application cut copy mode equals copy. We can change that to cut copy mode equals false. That should be better. Okay, so next up, all I really need to do is move it over to the right just a little bit. So with the shapes, the one that we just created, label preview, increment left 20. That's going to move it over to the right. And I just want to unselect this shape. So I can do that by selecting another cell, sheet 1, F144 select. That will select another cell. All right, so now I've shown you, now we got this preview. So normally it would be right here. We've moved it over a little bit to the right. You can play with that and adjust it accordingly. Now we have our preview all ready to print. Next up, all we need to do is print the label. So I've given it assign this macro. This is very easy to see. We can click assign macro and we can see that that's been assigned to print labels. So if we look in our code, we scroll down a bit, we see print labels. All this is we're going to print it out. We're going to assign a few things. Let's take a look at some of those variables just by spacing it out here, putting a comma. We can see some of those things. to and from, we want all. We don't want any copies. We could enter a copy if we wanted to, the number of copies. We don't. We could also enter, we could have a preview, which we don't want to do, so that's fine. We do want to use the active printer. If you have a specific printer you want to set this to, you would put that printer right here. We also want to print to file. We don't want to print to file, so we keep that. We don't want to collate, and we don't want to print to a file name. We also don't want to ignore the print areas. We have set the print areas, so we want to keep those print areas. All right, so how did we set the print areas? There's one more macro I wanted to briefly go over with you, and that is to build the label sheet. This is an important macro because this actually builds the sheet. So we're going to stop the calculations for that. What does that do? That runs a macro, basically, this macro right here called stop, and that basically enables events equals false, and it turns the calculation to manual. At the end of the macro, we'll reset the calculation. What that's going to do is turn on the events, and the calculation is set to automatic. All right, so in the design, basically, I want you to look this over. We don't have running out of time on this one, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to loop through all the sheets. We're going to set tons and tons of variables. Then we're going to set the columns and the spacing. What are those variables? Well, basically that is in here in the select. So what I'm going to do is inside this field, what we're going to do is we're going to set the label height, we're going to set the label width, we're going to set the number of columns, the number of rows, and we're going to create a sheet based on all of this information, including the column spacing, the column rows. One thing I wanted to bring out to your attention is if your printer is not, if it's not fitting in your printer, I want you to adjust this right here. -3, this sets the column width, and often there's been some issues with the column width. If we were to set this, let's just take a look at this. If I'm going to set this to 2, and we look in and we create this, and now we're going to go back into the label names and go to the printed labels. All right, so if I'm going to, now I'm going to run this macro, but I'm just going to comment out one line of code. If sheet B4 equals false, why is that? Well, there's no need to rebuild the label sheet unless the template has changed, but we haven't changed it in this, so I'm just going to comment this out, and I'm going to run this code. And what that's going to do is it's going to set the columns and the label widths and the spacer in between. So basically all this macro does is it sets the column widths, it sets the row heights, and it sets those spacers in between as it runs. It takes a little bit long to run depending upon the type of label that you have, because it's got to set a lot of different columns and based on all the rows that you might potentially have based on how much data you have, because it's got to set them all. So now it's done. And now when we go into, we can see that it's now preview is here. We can say it's sets there and it's properly done. So, but if for some reason you see the print view, this dotted line moves a little bit over to the left and it doesn't include the columns, you'll want to increase or decrease this set here. I'm going to put it back to 3 because I found that 3 is, it's just kind of a, basically is the column width. It sets those column widths based on whatever the label width is, and we use inches to points, which is really cool. It turns the inches measurement into points. We do that for our column width. All right, so we also set up the rows, and it's going to be based again also to inches to point based on the label height. So we have our label heights and our column widths based on the label width. Basically, you can go through this area. We also set the print area to based on all the labels that we created based on the last label column and the last label row. This sets the print area, and then also we adjust our left margins and our right margins, our top margins and our bottom margins, all based on these fields right here. These are all our margins. Now, you can set your own margins. Remember, into the label templates, you can then set your margins. I haven't done all, there's a lot I haven't done, so feel free to set those margins, and you can find them on the Avery.com website. So Avery.com website will have all the information for all of your column spacing, your row spacing, your left margin, right margin, top margin. Is going to give you all the information so you can fill it in for those labels that you wanted to see. All right, we've got a little bit over and extended on this. I'm so glad you got to see it. This is how we're going to design our own labels, including barcode fonts, pictures. Oh, one other thing. Take a look at this macro here. This is the add picture macro. It just basically adds a picture here. I think I showed you that already, but it's very, very simple. You can run through the macro on your own because we're way over time. All right, thanks so much for joining me. If you do like this video, if you want to see more of this type, let me know in the comments below if you think there's something I need to add. I'm not sure if there's going to be part 3. If I get enough ideas, then I will add a part 3. If not, we're good. We'll find something else to do next week. Thanks so much for joining us. Please share, subscribe, and like. And of course, again, if you want more of these, in fact, over 100, let me know. Just click on the link down below for the 100 workbooks. Great application that helps us out. All right, thanks so much and have a great week.